The shuttle dropped through the gray clouds above Earth with steady patience, like it had done this trip 1,000 times before. Mason sat near the back of the cabin, arms folded, staring through the small window. Below him, the planet slowly grew larger. Oceans, continents, cities hidden under clouds. From space, Earth looked calm, peaceful, almost untouched. But Mason knew better. The galaxy had spent 7 years tearing itself apart in war. Billions of credits burned, fleets destroyed, worlds lost. And now, somehow, they were calling it peace. Earth had a strange habit of looking normal, even after everything went wrong. Inside the shuttle, soldiers laughed loudly. It was their last flight home. Someone had brought a glowing blue bottle of something that definitely wasn't legal. One of them tried to pass it to Mason. He didn't look away from the window. He lifted one hand slightly. "Last time I drank that," he said calmly, "I woke up on a cargo drone headed for Jupiter." "That was training," someone argued. The drone disagreed. Mason replied. The cabin burst into laughter. Mason didn't mind the noise. After years of artillery fire and plasma explosions, laughter was one of the few sounds that didn't make his heart tighten. The shuttle shook slightly as it entered the lower atmosphere. A robotic voice announced their arrival and reminded them about the upcoming ceremony for returning veterans. Mason sighed. "Ceremony," he muttered. A soldier across from him grinned. "You'll get a medal. Maybe even a parade." "I prefer a sandwich," Mason said. "And 8 hours of sleep." "You always aim low." Low expectations prevent disappointment. The shuttle landed at the new Geneva orbital port with a soft mechanical sound. The doors opened. Warm air rushed in. It smelled like rain and city lights. No smoke. No burning metal. No plasma residue. Just Earth. They were escorted into a massive hall beneath the port. White floors reflected glowing banners welcoming veterans home. Officials in clean uniforms waited near a raised platform. Mason immediately felt tired. Speeches began. Words about sacrifice, unity, cooperation between worlds. The usual things said after a war. Mason stood with the others, hands behind his back, staring at a rotating hologram of Earth above the stage. Finally, a general began reading names. When Mason's name echoed through the hall, he stepped forward. Polite applause followed him that he reached the stage. A thin official smiled warmly. "Sergeant Mason Carter," the official said. "Your service in the Velian conflict was exemplary." "That's a generous word for surviving," Mason replied. The official laughed nervously and handed him a small metallic case. Mason opened it just enough to confirm there was something inside, then closed it again. "Thank you," he said. The official cleared his throat. "There is also an additional reward under the Interstellar Compensation Act." Mason frowned slightly. "I already received a medal. This is different." 2 security officers stepped forward. They escorted someone onto the stage. The hall grew quiet. Mason's expression changed slowly, from confusion to disbelief. The woman looked almost human. Pale skin, calm posture, silver hair falling gently across her shoulders. But the long, elegant ears rising through her hair made her identity unmistakable. "Velian." She stopped beside Mason. The official smiled proudly. "This is Kira, a surviving citizen of the Velian Dominion. Under the Compensation Act, captured individuals may be assigned to decorated veterans as personal assets." Silence spread through the room. Mason stared at him. "You're giving me a person," he said slowly. "Technically," the official replied carefully, "a registered alien property." Mason blinked. Did anyone in this building consider how insane that sounds? Murmurs spread through the audience. Mason looked at Kira. She met his eyes calmly. Gray, steady, tired, but not afraid. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Mason leaned slightly toward her. "I'm going to say something quietly," he murmured. Kira tilted her head slightly. "All right. I'm not your owner." She blinked once. "You're free." Something subtle changed in her expression. Not shock, but something close. "That is generous," she said softly. Mason nodded. "Good. Because this arrangement ends now." Behind them, the official cleared his throat nervously. There may be a procedural complication. Mason slowly turned his head. I'm already not enjoying this sentence. Alien civilians displaced by the war do not currently possess independent legal status on Earth. Mason waited. The official continued. Without a registered sponsor, she cannot legally exist here. Mason stared at him. Did you just tell me freedom requires paperwork? Yes. Mason rubbed his face. Kira spoke gently. If it helps, my species also has difficult bureaucracy. Mason exhaled. That somehow makes this worse. She glanced around the hall. Am I still considered your property? Mason looked at the officials, the guards, the audience pretending this was normal. Then he sighed. Apparently, he said, you're temporarily my legal problem. Kira studied him carefully. Then, very faintly, she smiled. Outside, the rain had stopped. The rain had stopped by the time they left the reception hall. Neon lights reflected off the wet pavement outside the orbital port. Massive cargo ships floated silently above the skyline. Transport drones moved in smooth, glowing lanes between towers. Mason stood at the edge of the platform, holding a small rectangular tablet the clerk had given him before they were dismissed. Kira stood beside him, calm and observant, as if the universe had simply handed her a strange situation and she had decided to adapt. Mason looked at the tablet again. According to this, he said, you are registered as my temporary dependent. Kira leaned slightly closer to read the screen. That sounds more polite than property. That's because governments prefer polite words. She nodded thoughtfully. That is familiar. Mason glanced at her. You're handling this surprisingly well. My planet exploded 6 months ago, she replied calmly. Mason paused. Right. She looked at the glowing skyline. This situation ranks lower on the disaster list. Fair. A taxi drone descended beside the curb with a soft hum. Mason waved it open and stepped inside. Kira followed. The door closed smoothly. The drone's voice spoke cheerfully. Destination? Mason rubbed his eyes. Residential District 17. The drone paused briefly. That area contains primarily veterans with psychological trauma. Yes. Would you like calming music during the flight? Mason exhaled. Yes. Soft instrumental music filled the cabin as the drone lifted into the night sky. Kira watched the city lights below. Her gray eyes reflected the glowing streets. Your world is very bright, she said quietly. Humans are afraid of the dark. Were you afraid during the war? Mason leaned back. No, why not? Because the dark was usually the safest place to hide. She considered that carefully. That is a very human answer. Is it? Yes. Honest. And slightly depressing. Mason smiled faintly. Give it time. I can do worse. The drone moved between tall buildings and traffic lanes filled with floating vehicles. Kira observed everything with quiet focus. You have never visited Earth before, Mason said. No, why not? Our government considered humans unpredictable. That sounds insulting. It was meant as caution. Mason nodded. Fair enough. The drone descended into a quieter district filled with residential towers. They stepped out in front of Mason's apartment building. Kira looked around. This place feels peaceful. That's because most residents are asleep or medicated. They entered the building. The hallway lights flickered slightly. Kira glanced around. Humans lived in controlled silence. Mason opened his apartment door. Inside was a small living space. A couch, a narrow kitchen, a table covered in electronic parts, and a large window overlooking the city. Kira stepped in slowly, studying everything. You live here alone? Yes. For how long? 3 years. She pointed toward the table. You repair machines? Sometimes. Are you skilled? I once fixed a military drone with duct tape and sarcasm. Kira blinked. I am unfamiliar with sarcasm as a repair method. It works surprisingly well. She accepted that calmly. Mason walked into the kitchen and opened a cabinet. Are you hungry? I have not eaten since yesterday. Perfect. He placed a container into the microwave. Kira stared at the machine. What is that? A microwave. What does it do? It cooks food. She crossed her arms slightly. You place food inside a metal box and irradiate it? Yes. That seems dangerous. It builds character. Kira watched the device spin. On my planet, we used gravity field cooking. Mason looked at her. You cooked food with gravity? Yes. And you're worried about my microwave? She considered that. Your technology seems aggressive. The microwave beeped. Mason handed her the warm noodles. She tasted them carefully. Her expression changed. This is surprisingly good. See? She looked at the container. What is it? Hostile noodles. She frowned slightly. Your species fought a galactic war, and this is victory food? Don't insult noodles. She took another bite. I apologize. They're acceptable. They sat quietly at the table. After a moment, Kira spoke softly. Sergeant Mason. Just Mason. Very well. You said I am free. That's the plan. But legally, I require a sponsor. Yes. Until that changes, I will remain here. Mason shrugged. Temporary arrangement. Yes. Silence returned. Then Kira glanced toward the wall display showing orbital traffic. After a pause, she said calmly, Your city has weak defense coverage. Mason slowly turned toward her. Excuse me? I counted 7 blind spots during the taxi ride. He leaned forward. You notice planetary defense weaknesses from a moving vehicle? Yes. The traffic was slow. Mason stared at her. You're terrifying. That was not my intention. Congratulations, anyway. She stood and accessed the wall display. A holographic globe of Earth appeared. Bright lines marked orbital defense satellites. Kira traced several points. Cargo traffic passes through this corridor every 4 hours. Yes. If an attack synchronized with that window, shield strength would temporarily reduce. Mason stared at the projection. How long did it take you to see this? For minutes. He exhaled slowly. Well, that's concerning. Kira looked at him. Would you like me to correct it? Mason blinked. You want to fix Earth's defense grid? Yes. You've been here 6 hours. That seems sufficient. Mason stared at her for a long moment. If we tell anyone, they'll either recruit you or lock you in a lab. That would be inconvenient. Yes. He leaned back. Then we don't tell anyone. She tilted her head. That seems irresponsible. Welcome to Earth. Kira folded her hands calmly. My species would not ignore such a vulnerability. Your species also used gravity cooking. That is unrelated. It proves you're advanced. She considered that. That is fair. Mason stood and looked at the glowing city. No explosions today, he muttered. Kira looked at him. Is that a goal? Yes. She nodded. That is acceptable. The night outside remained quiet, for now. Morning arrived quietly. Mason considered that suspicious. Peaceful mornings usually meant something complicated was coming later. He woke up on the couch. Sunlight filtered through the large window. The city outside was calm. Drones moved in steady lines. The sky was clear. From the kitchen came soft metal sounds. Mason sat up slowly. Please tell me the apartment is not on fire, he called. Kira's voice answered calmly. It is not. That's reassuring. He stood and walked toward the kitchen. When he entered, he stopped. The microwave sat open on the counter. Several small components were neatly arranged beside it. Mason stared. Why is my microwave disassembled? Kira looked up calmly. I was improving it. You were what? The radiation pattern was inefficient. Mason rubbed his face. You've been on Earth for less than 12 hours. Yes. And you decided my microwave needed alien engineering? It was a safety concern. It cooks noodles. Yes. Now it cooks them with improved thermal stability. He stared at the machine. You upgraded it. Yes. Does it still cook food? Kira pressed a button. The microwave hummed. Smoother, quieter. Yes. Mason crossed his arms. Well, that's the most productive home invasion I've ever experienced. Kira closed the panel carefully. Would you like breakfast? You made breakfast? Yes. 2 plates sat on the counterpoint. One contained eggs and bread. The other looked experimental. Mason pointed at the second plate. What is that? A traditional Velian morning meal. Is it dangerous? Only slightly. Define slightly. It may temporarily alter taste perception. Mason slowly slid that plate away. I'll start with the eggs. Kira nodded approvingly. They sat at the table. Mason took a bite. The tea paused. This is good. Kira looked pleased. I studied human cooking databases during the night. You studied cooking while I slept? Yes. Mason blinked. That explains things. What things? Your calmness. Kira tilted her head. Why? Because anyone who watches 6 hours of human television understands our species is completely insane. She nodded slowly. I suspected that. Mason laughed softly. For a moment, the apartment felt normal. Then his wrist communicator vibrated. He looked down. His expression changed. Kira noticed immediately. Bad news? Possibly. What is it? It's from the Veterans Bureau. She leaned slightly forward. Did they discover the defense weakness? No good. They want me to attend another meeting. Kira frowned slightly. Why? Mason read the message again. My alien asset requires behavioral evaluation. Kira raised an eyebrow. They want to evaluate me. Yes. Why? Probably to confirm you aren't planning to conquer Earth. She considered that calmly. That seems reasonable. Mason stood and grabbed his jacket. Reasonable isn't the word I'd use. She followed him toward the door. Should I be concerned? He paused. Honestly? Yes. She nodded. That is acceptable. They stepped into the hallway. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Inside, the building was quiet. Veterans lived here. Many preferred silence. The elevator descended slowly. Kira watched the floor numbers change. Is this building always this calm? Most residents sleep during the day, Mason replied. That sounds peaceful. It's mostly therapy sessions and arguments with coffee machines. Kira nodded thoughtfully. Your species has complicated technology relationships. Technology is fine, Mason said. Instructions are the problem. The elevator reached the ground floor. An old maintenance robot was polishing the floor while playing cheerful music. Kira stopped to watch it. That machine appears content. It has been playing the same song for 8 years. That may explain it. They stepped outside. Morning traffic drones moved above the streets. Kira looked upward. Your planet is busy. Humans get nervous when it's quiet. Mason checked his communicator again. She noticed, you still look concerned. I'm predicting how strange this meeting will be. What is the worst outcome? They decide you're too dangerous to exist freely. Kira remained calm. That would be unfortunate. Yes. What is the second worst? They recruit you for military research. That seems less unfortunate. It involves years inside a lab. She frowned slightly. That sounds worse. Exactly. They entered the transit station. A magnetic train waited silently. Doors opened smoothly. Inside, holographic advertisements floated above the seats. Point 1 displayed instant noodles in 30 flavors. Kira pointed at it. Your society is very committed to noodles. Mason sat down. You say that like it's unusual. I suspect noodles are foundational to your civilization. That's classified information. The train accelerated. Outside, buildings blurred past. Orbital satellites glimmered in the sky. Kira leaned closer to the window. You have many satellites. Yes. That seems inefficient. It is. She studied the sky carefully. Some satellites moved slightly in defensive formations. She narrowed her eyes. Mason noticed. Please stop looking for weaknesses. I'm not searching. They appear automatically? Yes. He sighed. Look at trees instead. She turned her gaze toward a line of trees outside. They appear structurally stable. I'll take that. The train slowed near a large government complex. Tall metallic walls reflected sunlight. Kira studied it. This building seems important. That's usually a warning sign. They entered the lobby. Security drones hovered near the ceiling. A receptionist looked up. Sergeant Mason Carter. Yes. Room 42B. They walked down the corridor. A sign read. Interspecies Review Board. Mason exhaled. Here we go. Kira read the sign. Review implies evaluation. Yes. That seems accurate. The door opened. Inside sat 3 officials and a hovering analysis drone. Mason and Kira sat down. The drone scanned gently. Kira watched it. Is this necessary? Standard procedure, one official said. The drone beeped. Subject displays high cognitive efficiency. Mason sighed. She upgraded my microwave. The officials paused. She did what? Kira answered calmly. The thermal distribution was inefficient. The drone beeped again. Advanced engineering capability detected. The room grew quiet. One official leaned forward. Miss Kira, how familiar are you with planetary defense systems? Mason closed his eyes slightly. Kira looked at him. May I answer honestly? Mason hesitated. Maybe not. Too late, she spoke calmly. I noticed weaknesses during a taxi ride. Silence filled the room. The drone beeped loudly. Mason leaned back slowly. Well, he muttered, this just became complicated. The room stayed silent for several long seconds. The three officials stared at Kira. The hovering drone blinked repeatedly, processing her statement. Mason leaned back in his chair. Well, he said quietly, this is about to become a very long meeting. The elderly official finally spoke. You identified weaknesses in Earth's orbital defense system? Yes, Kira replied calmly. The woman beside him leaned forward. During a taxi ride? Yes. The vehicle moved slowly. I had time to observe. The drone emitted a steady series of analytical beeps, subject confidence level extremely high. Mason raised a hand. For the record, he said, I told her not to mention that. The woman looked at him. You were aware of these vulnerabilities? Yes. And you did not report them? Mason shrugged slightly. It felt like something that would ruin everyone's breakfast. The elderly man removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Sergeant Carter, an alien civilian discovered flaws in our planetary defense grid within minutes of arrival. And you responded by making noodles. To be fair, Mason replied, she made breakfast. Kira nodded politely. I also upgraded the microwave. The drone beeped again. Advanced technical competency confirmed. The woman turned back to Kira. Explain how you identified the issue. Kira gestured gently toward the holographic display. Your shield satellites reduce power during heavy civilian traffic to avoid interference with navigation systems. The hologram zoomed in. Bright lines showed orbital cargo routes crossing Earth. When ships pass through this corridor, she continued, defense coverage temporarily weakens. The officials leaned closer. If an attack fleet synchronized with those windows, Kira said calmly, it could enter orbit before full defensive response. The room became very quiet. Mason looked at the display. She's right, isn't she? The elderly man sighed. Yes. Unfortunately. Mason exhaled slowly. Well, that explains the uncomfortable feeling I've had since yesterday. Kira glanced at him. I did not intend to cause alarm. You didn't, Mason said. You caused competence. The drone floated closer to her. Strategic analysis capability, exceptional. One officer whispered behind Mason. She redesigned the grid in her head. Mason nodded slightly. 2 hours ago, she was eating noodles. The woman leaned forward. Miss Kira, if given access to the satellite control system, could you correct this weakness? Kira considered the hologram carefully. Yes. How long would it take? Approximately 2 hours. The officials exchanged looks. Mason stared at her. 2 hours? It is primarily a routing adjustment. The elderly man folded his hands. Sergeant Carter, do you understand what this means? Yes, Mason replied. It means she's smarter than our entire defense committee. The drone beeped in agreement. Recommendation, immediate security consultation. The woman sighed. This is serious. Mason nodded. Yes, but it's also the first good news I've heard all year. The elderly official turned to Kira. If we asked you to assist in strengthening Earth's defenses, would you agree? Kira looked thoughtful. Would that require becoming military property again? No, then yes. Mason turned toward her. You're volunteering? She nodded calmly. Your planet currently hosts my noodles. That's the most practical motivation I've ever heard. The drone emitted a soft, approving tone. Subject humor detected. The woman stood. We will begin system authorization immediately. 2 hours later, Mason sat inside a secure control chamber. The walls were covered in holographic displays showing Earth's orbital network. Hundreds of satellites drifted across the projection. Kira stood at the central console. Her movements were precise and steady, Several military engineers watched from behind. Point one whispered to Mason, "Is she always this calm?" Mason replied, "She disassembled my microwave before breakfast." That did not answer the question that IT should have. Kira spoke without turning around. "I can hear you." The engineer stepped back nervously on the display. The orbital grid shifted. Civilian traffic corridors adjusted slightly. Shield satellites moved in smooth coordination. Kira paused. "Sergeant Mason." "Yes." "Confirm the Atlantic corridor." Mason checked the screen. That glowing line. "Yes." She tapped a command. The shield satellites repositioned instantly, overlapping coverage without blocking traffic routes. Point one engineer gasped softly. Kira stepped back. Coverage is now continuous. The room remained silent. Then the analysis drone beeped. Planetary defense integrity, 100%. Mason leaned back in his chair. "Well, that was fast." The lead officer stared at the display. "Our engineers have tried to optimize this for 6 years." Kira looked slightly confused. It was mostly a scheduling conflict. Mason stood up slowly. "You realize what you just did?" "Yes." "You strengthened the entire planet." "That was the objective." Several officials began applauding quietly. Kira appeared uncomfortable with the attention. "That is unnecessary." The elderly man approached her. "You have protected billions of lives." She nodded. "I prefer planets that do not explode." Mason smiled faintly. "Good policy." The official tapped a terminal on the wall. A document printed with a soft sound. He handed it to Kira. "Under Earth law, you now qualify for provisional citizenship." Kira examined the tablet. "So, I am legally independent." "Yes." Mason crossed his arms. "No chains. No sponsors." Kira placed the tablet into her jacket. "I will stay." Mason blinked. "You decided quickly." "Yes." "Your planet has acceptable noodles." Mason laughed quietly. "That's the most secure immigration strategy ever recorded." The government complex felt different on the way out. Not heavier, just quieter. Behind them, engineers were already studying the upgraded defense grid. Screens glowed. Data moved. Earth's orbit now looked cleaner, stronger, more balanced. Mason walked beside Kira through the wide entrance hall. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the afternoon sun was lowering over the city. Cargo ships drifted across the sky. Satellites shimmered faintly above the horizon. Kira looked upward. "Your defense network is stable." "Good. It will protect your world." "That's the idea." She turned toward him. "You seem calmer than when we first met." Mason leaned against the railing. "When we first met, someone tried to give me an alien person as a reward. That was unusual." "Very." Kira nodded. "Now I'm a citizen." "Progress." She studied him carefully. "You changed as well." "Ow! You trust me." Mason smiled slightly. "You upgraded my microwave. That requires trust." Kira's eyes reflected the sunlight. After a moment, she asked softly, "What happens now?" Mason looked out at the skyline. "I suppose I go back to my quiet veteran life. And I find work." "Sounds reasonable." She nodded. "I could help rebuild systems. Improve technology." Mason glanced at her. "That sounds dangerous." "Why?" "Because when you say improve, it usually means redesign the entire thing." She tilted her head. "That is sometimes necessary." He laughed under his breath. "You're not wrong." They began walking down the steps toward the street. For a while, the city noise surrounded them. Drones, traffic, distant voices. Then Kira spoke again. "Mason." "Yeah." "You freed me immediately." He nodded. "Of course." Most humans would have accepted the arrangement. Mason shrugged. "Nobody should be treated like property. War already gave me enough things to regret." Kira looked at him for a long moment. "I think my species misunderstood humans." "That happens," Mason said lightly. "We misunderstand ourselves too." She smiled faintly. A taxi drone arrived beside the curb. Mason waved it open. They stepped inside. The drone lifted smoothly into the evening sky. Below them, Earth glowed with city lights. Above them, the orbital shield grid now operated in perfect alignment. Silent, steady, and strong, Kira watched the view. This planet is safer now. Thanks to you. She shook her head. I only corrected a design flaw. That's still impressive. The drone spoke. Destination? Mason leaned back. Home. The cabin filled with soft music as they flew across the city. After a few minutes, Kira spoke quietly. Will people fear me? Probably. Is that a problem? Mason thought for a moment. Only if we let it be. She looked at him. And will they trust me? He smiled. After today, they'll have no choice. The drone descended near his apartment building. They stepped out together. The night air was cool. City lights shimmered above. For the first time since the war ended, Mason felt something he hadn't expected. Not excitement. Not relief. Stability. Inside the apartment, the upgraded microwave hummed softly as if proud of itself. Kira walked in and looked around. This place feels different now. How so? It no longer feels temporary. Mason leaned against the wall. You planning to stay? She nodded. Yes. Why? She thought carefully before answering. Because your world is flawed, but reparable. Mason raised an eyebrow. That's a compliment. It is. And the noodles? Also acceptable. He laughed quietly. Outside the window, satellites moved across the sky in calm, coordinated paths. The planet no longer felt fragile, it felt guarded. Kira stood near the window, watching Earth rotate slowly in the distance. Mason. Yeah. Your species was once considered unpredictable. Still is. She turned toward him. I believe that unpredictability may have saved you. He smiled. Maybe. A moment of silence passed between them. Then Mason pointed toward the kitchen. Well, he said, if we're going to rebuild the future, Kira waited. We're definitely upgrading the microwave again. For the first time, she laughed softly, not politely, not cautiously, but genuinely. Outside, Earth continued spinning beneath its strengthened shield, no longer protected by fear, but by understanding. And inside a small apartment in a quiet veteran building, two very different species began something neither of them had expected after a war, but a partnership.